This is part 5 in our series. Let's start with a quick review of the lessons taught in Ecclesiastes. Lesson 1 was this: you can't achieve, accumulate, or indulge your way to permanent satisfaction. You can't accomplish enough that you finally reach this point where you're like, that is the reward, and the reward is worth it. And that sense, that feeling sticks with you. You're permanently satisfied. You feel like you finally have accomplished all the purpose in your life. You can't achieve enough. You can't accumulate enough possessions, right, to finally get to the point where, yes, that's it. Permanent satisfaction, permanent happiness. You can't indulge your way to permanent satisfaction. You can't indulge your way to happiness would be another way to say that, right? In fact, we saw that indulging appetites, pleasure, often is contrary to helping us achieve the satisfaction we desire. Lesson 2 was this: your faith will often be in tension with reality as you see it. We live in the world that Q describes, the world where there's injustice and there's oppression and there's death and there's suffering, and we have faith. We believe that God is good and that God is generous and God is kind and God is powerful and God knows everything and God could fix it all like that, right? That's what our faith says. And so there are times when, as we're going through life, where it seems like our faith is in a collision course with harsh realities that we're experiencing. Like, God, why is it this way? God, why are you not answering these prayers? God, why are you not intervening? God, why are you not solving? Why are you not fixing? God. Your faith may be in tension, perhaps often in tension with reality as you see it. Lesson number 3 was this: you can't wisdom your way to a perfect, pain-free life. Proverbs are wonderful. They're wisdom, right? They give us insight in how to live well in light of the existence of God. And they're a huge gift to us, but you can't wisdom your way to a perfect, pain-free life. You can't leverage all the Proverbs in a way to make it so that you get all the blessings and you have none of the pain. Why? Because they're exceptions, right? One commentator put it this way. He said, Q forces us to realize that we can't take the generalized principles of Proverbs as unexceptionable laws or as cast iron promises. Biblical faith does not have a mechanical view of the universe. A mechanical view, yeah. Like the A always leads to B. This cause always has that effect. This action always gets that result. For example, as Q points out in chapter 9, verse 11, the fastest runner doesn't always win the race. And the strongest guy doesn't win every single battle, right? There are exceptions. There are exceptions to the general principle that good things happen to good people. Job, think of Job, the Old Testament hero. He was living a good and a God-fearing life. And yet, horrible loss, devastation, catastrophic loss came into his life, because what Job didn't know was that God had allowed Satan to have an influence, to play a part, and to test Job in a very, very severe way. And Job's friends all had this mechanical view of the universe. Like, Job, if you're good, then God will give you blessings. And if you're bad, then God will punish you. And you're being punished, therefore you must have been bad. Fess up. They had a very mechanical view of the universe. Biblical faith doesn't have that view. The commentator continues, there are indeed moral principles and consequences built into the universe as God has ordained it. But life throws up all kinds of exceptions when things don't work out as we thought they should. And wisdom takes account of both dimensions of life, the general principles and the absurd exceptions. The wise person will apply the principles. The wise person will read the book of Proverbs and other pieces of wisdom literature and take careful note to what those are saying and then to apply them. But the wise person will also recognize that there are exceptions. And it's very, very important to maintain your faith in God during those exceptions. That's wisdom. Lesson Number 4, we haven't covered yet. This was in chapter 8, as a little section that we skipped last time. And here it is. You can't reason your way to ultimate answers. You can't reason your way to ultimate answers. This is how Q phrases it. Chapter 8, verse 16. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the activity that's done on the earth, even though one's eyes do not close and sleep day or night, I observed all the work of God and concluded that a person is unable to discover the work that is done under the sun. Even though a person labors hard to explore it, he cannot find it. Even if a wise person claims to know, he's unable to discover it. Q says, there are things that we're unable to do. He says, I worked hard at it. Even if somebody spends all day, all night, never sleeps, never gives up, labors diligently, is a wise observer, you still can't reason your way to ultimate answers. We could phrase it this way. You can't start with a finite processing machine, the brain, right? And finite perspective on the world, because we only can observe so much. We don't see things from God's perspective. We don't see things from the perspective of beyond time, for example, right? You can't start with a finite processor and finite data and end up with infinite insight. That won't work. You can't get ultimate answers to ultimate questions using only what we have available if it's just your brain and your observations. You need outside information, or as we Jesus followers would say, you need God to reveal things to you. So I talked about that. I've used that line, ultimate questions and ultimate answers. Let me give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Here's an ultimate question. Why does the universe exist? I mean, why is there something rather than nothing? You know, science can try to explain like how the universe maybe came into being or why it's doing what it's doing or whatever. But it's got nothing on the answer to why does the universe exist and why is there something rather than nothing. Here's another ultimate question. What is the purpose of it all? Like, what's the purpose of the universe? Why is it here? What's it for? What's the purpose of my life? Why am I here? What am I for? Well, here's a third ultimate question. What's the origin of good and evil? Like, where did it come from? We need outside information to get ultimate answers to ultimate questions. Big truth in Ecclesiastes number 5. Open minds are like open windows. They need screens on them to keep the bugs out, right? We've been saying that last couple of weeks. Let's do it one more time. You do the hand motions with me if you can, right? Open minds are like open windows. They need screens on them to keep the bugs out. But as we saw so clearly in the last lesson, a faulty screen will allow bugs in and screen truth out. Yeah, right? So those are the big lessons that we've learned from Ecclesiastes so far. Let's apply our screen to Q's closing comments. In this section, Q's going to give some advice to a young man regarding youth, old age, and death. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 11. We're going to start at verse 7. Q says, light is sweet and is pleasing for the eyes to see the sun. Indeed, if someone lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. And let him remember the days of darkness, since they will be many. All that comes is futile. Rejoice, young person, while you're young, and let your heart be glad in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the desire of your eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring you to judgment. Remove sorrow from your heart and put away pain from your flesh, because youth and the prime of life are fleeting. There was a key word. It was repeated a couple times. I tried to emphasize it when I read it. Rejoice. Q's first piece of advice is this: listen, rejoice. If someone lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. That was in verse 8. He says, rejoice while you're young. That was verse 9. Right? Rejoice, rejoice. Be excited about enjoying what you have, the life that you have. Now, there are a couple of things as we read through there that might have struck you like, wait a minute. You know, the little screen alert. We're doing screen practice still. Was that a bug? In verse 9, for example, Q says, walk in the ways of your heart and the desire of your eyes. Is Q advocating follow your heart wherever it leads? Because that sounds like a bug, doesn't it? Maybe. I mean, Q said some interesting things, so maybe. Probably not. Because he does warn that God will bring you into judgment, or in other words, God will hold you accountable, but maybe there's a bug there. Verse 10, Q says, banish anxiety from your heart and remove troubles from your body. Is Q advocating avoid pain at all costs? Maybe? Probably not, because Q's a smart guy, and I think Q knows that isn't possible, so probably not. So what is Q saying? Well, here's what I hope Q is saying, and what I think he's saying. Enjoy life responsibly. Enjoy life responsibly. Like, enjoy life, but do it in the knowledge that there is a God, and you will have to give account to him for what you've done in this life. I think another way to say it that would be consistent with the message of Ecclesiastes would be this. There's a season for everything under the sun, right? That's chapter 3. There's a time to be young and a time to be old. And while you're young, do the things that can only be done while you're young. Like, enjoy being young. And you do it, how? By doing the things that you can only do while you're young. So hike mountains, right? Go to the pool and do a belly smacker or a cannonball in the pool, because the day is going to come when you're not going to do either one of those things. While you're young, do what you can only do when you're young. Play sports. Have babies. Hey, when you're young, your metabolism tends to be a little higher. So that's the time maybe when you can eat a little bit more. When you're young, do what you can only do when you're young, right? Stay up late playing games with your friends. Put soap on your inner tube before going down the water slide. Go on an energy-intensive mission trip. Work at camp for an entire summer, right? While you're young. Chase a dream. Invent something radically new. Build a tree house and sleep in it without an air mattress, right? You got the idea. I think that's what Q is saying. And in chapter 12, Q moves to a poem, his further advice for this young man. And this advice has to do with old age and death. Let's read chapter 12 together. So remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of adversity come and the years approach when you will say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun and the light are darkened, and the moon and the stars and the clouds return after the rain. On the day when the guardians of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, the women who grind grain cease because they are few, and the ones who watch through the windows see dimly. The doors of the street are shut while the sound of the mill fades. When one rises at the sound of a bird and all the daughters of song grow faint. Also, they're afraid of heights and the dangers on the road. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper loses its spring, and the caperberry has no effect, for the mere mortal is headed to his eternal home, and the mourners will walk around in the street. Before the silver cord is snapped, and the gold bowl is broken, and the jar is shattered at the spring, and the wheel is broken into the well, and the dust returns to the earth as it once was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Another poem. I remember being taught this poem when I was in youth group a long time ago. Our youth leaders read the opening line, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, and like, okay, this is a passage meant to youth, so let's teach on this, and they were right in doing so. I confess I had trouble understanding the meaning of the phrases, and they were trying to go through them line by line, like this phrase means this phrase means, and I remember even back then going, if that phrase means that, why didn't he just say it? For example, in verse 3, it says, the women who grind the grain cease because they are few. And I remember being taught, well, this is a reference to losing your teeth as you get old. The women who grind grain aren't women, they're your teeth. And they cease grinding because they're few. They fall out of your head. And I remember thinking, well, okay, that kind of makes sense. But why didn't he just say, remember your Creator before you lose your teeth? So, yeah. As I was doing research for this message, I was reading several commentaries, and one commentator said this. He said, while it would be an exaggeration to say that there are as many different interpretations of this passage as there are commentators, it would at least be fair to say that there is no consensus on the interpretation. And then he explains. The disagreement among interpreters exists at least three levels. First, should the passage be interpreted literally, symbolically, allegorically, or with a mixture of two of these approaches, or even all three? And whichever line of interpretation one chooses, is there any assurance that the author of the passage was himself consistent throughout the whole passage? Like, for example, could the author have shifted from literal to symbolic to allegorical back to literal? Is that possible? Second, there's disagreement among interpreters because once you adopt a literal or symbolic or allegorical interpretation, what exactly is the overall meaning of the passage? And then third, what's the meaning of the individual clauses, phrases, and words, keeping in mind that some of the words in this poem occur in the Hebrew Bible only here. So you've got nothing else to compare it with and go, oh, well, that word means this because, in this passage, see how it was used, and this passage over here is used that way. So, call me chicken if you wish. But here, I'm not going to go line by line through this poem. Instead, I'm proposing let's focus on what is so clear that even a person who struggles with interpreting literature can understand Q's main point, which was right at the very beginning, chapter 12, verse 1, remember your Creator. And Q added, and start in your youth rather than waiting until later in your life. Don't wait till later to get right with God, live with God in mind. Start at the very beginning. Remember your Creator. But what does it mean to remember our Creator? Can't just be like mere recollection, right? What does it mean to remember your Creator? I think it's this: live with Him in mind. Live with Him in mind. Perhaps an illustration would help. There was a war cry. Remember the Alamo, right? When they yelled that war cry, that wasn't like, hey, anybody remember the Alamo? And, one of the guys raises his hand and says, oh, yeah. I think there's a building somewhere in Texas. There's a battle, 1800s, something. Yeah, Alamo. Yeah, that's it. Somebody else says, oh, yeah, I've been there. Took the kids, wife and kids. We went to, that's not what he means by remember. Like, do you recollect? Do you have any memory of or knowledge of? It's remember the Alamo. Like, listen, guys. Remember, those guys at the Alamo so believed in the importance of independence of Texas that they stood to the very last man. They refused to surrender. They refused to give up. They gave their lives in the battle against those nasty Mexicans. And this is our time to finish what they started. So remember the Alamo, right? It's remember and live in light of that reality. That's what Q is saying. Listen, remember and live in light of that reality. Remember the youth and the prime of life are fleeting. And that was chapter 11, verse 10. And remember that the body returns to the earth and the spirit to the Creator, right? Chapter 12, verse 7. He says, when you're young, you're strong. And there's this temptation to think like you're almost like invincible. You're not. You're going to die. When you're young, you're powerful, and you almost think like you can do life on your own. You can't. You might think that life is about you and everything is ahead of you. It's not. Remember this and build your life on this truth that you owe your allegiance and the obedience to the one who created you, the one who made you. You were created by Him. You owe Him your allegiance. You owe Him your obedience. And you will give an account to Him for it. Remember this and start remembering and building your life on it now. Which leads us to big lesson number 6 in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I'm going to phrase it this way. It is always remember your Creator season. It is always remember your Creator season. In chapter 3, there was another poem, right? There's a time for this and a time for that, time for this thing, time for that thing. Let's tie that together with what we have here. Whether you are in the time of your youth, or you're approaching middle age, or you are firmly in old age, regardless of what time it is time to remember your Creator. Whether the season that you're in right now what is a time for laughter or a time for mourning, it is time to remember your Creator. Whether right now it's a time to build or time to tear down, it is time to remember your Creator. Whether it's a time for war or the time for peace, it is, regardless of whether it's time for war or time for peace, it is time to remember your Creator. Whether you are in a season for saving money or you're in a season where it's time to spend out your savings, it is time to remember your Creator. Whether you're in a season of smooth sailing or a season of intense storms, it is time to remember your Creator. On the good days, know that it is time to remember your Creator. And on the bad days, it is time to remember your Creator. Why? Because it is always, always remember your Creator season. Build your life on that rock solid truth.